Heartless. EU got called out for hoarding all COVID-19 vaccines while others suffered and collapsed. Brussels has been blamed as the biggest roadblock to the success of the world's fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The EU is accused of refusing to share COVID-19 vaccine patents to scientists across the world in order to speed up the production of the jabs and end the pandemic. India and South Africa have proposed waiving intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, but face opposition from developed members such as the European Union, Britain, and Switzerland. They say it would be better to use flexibilities in existing WTO rules, which allow countries to award licenses to local producers. Mary Robinson, the chair of the Elders and a former president of Ireland, said the opposition to patent waiving of vaccines and treatments against COVID-19 is simply unconscionable. She blasted, "Epidemiologists warned us time and again that allowing the virus to spread around the world is a recipe for new mutations to develop and that they will indiscriminately harm us all. This waiver, which has now dominated WTO talks for over a year, is a necessary global solution to end the pandemic." Yet one powerful voice at the WTO has continued to undermine this effort, and that must change. The European Union represents the biggest roadblock to this effective solution to ramp up the supply of life-saving vaccines, treatments and tests, hasten the end of the pandemic and put solidarity at the heart of the world's response. The European Parliament is ramping up pressure on the Commission, with lawmakers approving a resolution in support of a time-limited waiver for intellectual property. Kathleen Van Brempt from the centre-left Socialists and Democrats group said, "Europe must stop blocking the temporary waiver on intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines and start sharing its mRNA technology, the data on production and the vaccines patents to ensure we can boost the production and distribution of vaccines to all in need." Governments were set to meet at the WTO Ministerial Conference in Geneva this week, now postponed because of risks posed by Omicron, to decide on whether a waiver on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, TRIPS, the world's most comprehensive multilateral agreement on intellectual property, would finally be approved for COVID vaccines and supplies. To secure a waiver, the TRIPS Council can be convened at any time to put forward a written proposal for the WTO General Council to formalize. Such a waiver was first proposed by South Africa and India in October 2020 and now has the backing of over 100 nations. This proposal has been blocked by only a handful of wealthy countries, including the UK, Switzerland and Germany, where major pharmaceutical companies are headquartered. Despite the postponement, governments can still take immediate action to approve the waiver this week. WTO Director General Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala highlighted that negotiations must continue and delegates should be fully empowered to close as many gaps as possible as this new variant reminds us once again of the urgency of the work we are charged with. Unions believe that positive steps can be made to vaccinate the world. The CGU cites an Oxford University study that demonstrates a pathway for the global community to establish regional centers capable of producing 8 billion doses of vaccine by May 2022 to help end the pandemic. Stephen Cotton, chair of the CGU, and General Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation, ITF, said, "I speak directly to the heads of state for the UK, Germany and Switzerland when I say this: your decisions are putting millions of lives and livelihoods at risk. The world is watching you, as panic and anxiety spread at the rise of a new variant that may have been prevented if you had acted sooner. The waiver can be agreed this week. You must act now or forever hold the preventable deaths of millions more on your conscience." Over 4 million people have died from COVID-19 since the waiver was first proposed. The Biden administration, which has given away more doses than all other governments combined, made clear in a statement last week that the TRIPS waiver is an urgent and essential next step to end the pandemic. Rosa Pavanethli, General Secretary of Public Services International, PSI, added, "A handful of leaders are putting the interests of the pharma lobby ahead of the frontline workers they once applauded. This is an insult to their sacrifice. If the leaders of the UK, Switzerland and EU nations want to break the cycle of lockdowns and travel blocks, then they must immediately stop blocking the TRIPS waiver proposal so no barriers stand in the way of expanding vaccine production and quashing new variants. The International Monetary Fund recently warned that inadequate access to vaccines could lead to global GDP losses of $5.3 trillion over the next 5 years. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical corporations are now making over $1 million in pre-tax profits every 15 minutes. In pre-tax